Welcome to Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast, a bi-weekly look at all things related to the growing elite clubs nationally, the ECNL. For more information on the ECNL, visit us at www.theecnl.com. Now, here's your host for Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast, former U.S. Soccer press officer and longtime soccer broadcaster, Dean Linke.
Don't miss this week's edition of Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast, with a new format spearheaded by the President and CEO of the ECNL, Christian Lavers, and their Vice President and Chief of Staff, Doug Bracken. Christian Lavers sets the tone for this week's show.
How do we use this to connect better with the coaches and the clubs and the people in the league and the people that care about youth soccer? The name of the podcast was Breaking the Line, and the concept of that was to get beyond the field, get deeper into things that impact soccer, to get behind the scenes on decisions within soccer. We're going to try and just turn this into a more informal discussion back and forth on things that people want to talk about.
And as Doug Bracken says, that will include some reflection.
I think it's always interesting just to think back and reflect on, where we came from to where we are and how wildly different it is, for the better, for sure.
Be a part of the podcast. Send in your questions to info@theecnl.com. And we released a new format with Christian and Doug. I think you'll like it after this message from the ECNL.
As the game continues to evolve in the United States, the ECNL remains the standard of excellence in youth soccer. The Elite Clubs National League has grown to include over 200 clubs and nearly 50,000 players across the country, with a robust competition platform for teams, educational resources for coaches and clubs, and unparalleled identification and development opportunities for players. Alongside its member clubs, collaborating to create a better future, the ECNL continues to raise the game every day. The ECNL is more than a league. Welcome back to Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast. Once again, here's Dean.
This is Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast, and you know what? We are going to break the line, and we're going to do that now, and we're going to do that moving forward with this show, and we're going to do it with Doug Bracken, who's a VP for the ECNL. He was there since day one, or day -1, as they'll talk about, as well as Christian Lavers, the President and CEO of the ECNL. And here to talk about the new format for Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lavers.
I appreciate that, Dean, and don't be going too far because we want you involved in this as well. But I think what Doug and I have been talking about and with people on our team internally is just what is the best use of this podcast? How do we use this to connect better with the coaches and the clubs and the people in the league and the people that care about youth soccer? And so the name of the podcast was Breaking the Line, and the concept of that was to get beyond the field, get deeper into things that impact soccer, to get behind the scenes on decisions within soccer, whether that's league, club, association, whatever it may be. We've tried a variety of different things in the podcast, as you know, Dean. I mean, we've talked to different people about different topics, college, pro, high school, all sorts of stuff. But we're going to try and just turn this into a more informal discussion back and forth on things that we think, things that people want to talk about. We're going to invite people to send in questions to the league.
Yeah, if you want to send in a question, it's info@theecnl.com. And I'll add that over 15 years of doing this, I'm sure Christian and I have formed lots of opinions and thoughts about what it's like to run a youth soccer league and just interact with people. And so we just want to bring you some of that, help people understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, what our thoughts are about it in a really authentic way. That's the challenge.
Doug Bracken is doing it from the fanciest studio with the coolest glasses. So
that's right. Thank you, Dean.
You guys rock and roll.
I think at some point, if this gets as big as we know it will be, maybe we'll be on video as well, and everybody can take in the professionalism with my studio.
I have never really voluntarily solicited questions from people, but I do think that's what we want here and what we do here moving forward is because we want to talk about things that people care about and that they want to know about the league and about youth soccer. And that's what we're here for. And so we want this to be informal. We got a couple of ideas on things to talk about today. And one of them is actually coming from some questions that got sent into the league and that we know people are talking about at this time of year, because it's crazy time, as some people call it, with tryouts and parents looking everywhere and clubs looking everywhere, and which league you're in and what you're going to do with your schedule is a gigantic piece of planning.
We actually, Christian, talked about that today at my club, that are we getting close to the point where we will have a tryout and then the very next day have another tryout for the following year and offer kids? It keeps getting earlier and earlier and keeps pushing back. So I'm with you. It seems like the crazy time of year is kind of all year, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gotten crazier. I mean, if you go back 20 years ago when soccer was a very different thing. The cost structures were different. The competition structures were different. And it's gone through a variety of different evolutions. But right now, it seems really clear that one of the most important things to people is what league that you're in. I think we've publicly said many, many times leagues don't develop soccer players, and I'm going to repeat that again here. And that's being said when being in the ECNL is one of the really positive things that clubs have. And we're excited about that. And we're obviously happy that people feel that way. But we're not going to sit here and claim that being in the ECNL means that your players are going to get better. I mean, at the end of the day, players get better because clubs help them. Players work hard. What we do is provide that stage for them. And to the degree that competition helps push, motivate, and challenge, yeah, leagues can play a role in that. But the fundamental ingredient of development is not the league game. It's what happens every day, what happens at home with the kid. But man, right now, that's the topic. And people talk about acronym soup and which league in that and what pathway in that and why is this decision made and who gets into this league and not that league. And that's probably the biggest conversation we hear right now.
This league has kind of pulled back the curtain on clubs. So like 15 years ago, you and I never talked to each other. We don't know what you're doing. So I think another consequence, I said this at the symposium, is that we are much more communicating with each other now. So we kind of know there's a little bit more of an openness about development or what's happening at the club level. And that, like 15, 20 years ago, I didn't know if what I was doing was the right thing or how I was doing it, or right, because the comparison was only, you played a game and you won or you lost. You didn't know really. So I think that's the other thing I would say, although I 100% agree with you that clubs develop players, leagues don't develop players. But I think a league has helped remove the barriers that existed that kept us from kind of talking to each other, learning from each other, finding out, what are you doing? What am I doing? Even some affirmation that what I'm doing makes some sense.
I think that's a good point, because if you look at any, I think really, really high performing industry, or fast growing industry, people are learning from each other all the time. I mean, if you look even inside of companies, the most effective companies have really good communication between departments, between levels, alignment, whatever. And so to the degree that the sort of advent of our league has facilitated more communication between clubs, between directors, I think that does have an impact collaterally or tangentially on development, because people learn faster, right? They learn from each other faster. They test out ideas faster because they're getting more ideas. So to that degree, I think that's another reason for changing some of this format is, more open communication, more open discussion, whether that's on this to stimulate questions across the ecosystem, or just what's happened within our league is people have built relationships and opened up a little bit and shared ideas and questioned each other. All of that unquestionably has helped make soccer way better. Youth soccer is way better because of it.
The other thing is now you're in a platform that kind of forces you to look at the standards that you have. I know that's a buzzword that people use all the time, standards this, standards that, which, is funny sometimes, but it has from a club level made us look at our standards and say, hey, if this person who's I'm competing against in my same platform is doing this to raise their level, whether it be education or training environment or whatever, it pushes me to do that. And probably if I look at my environment, our environment, or the environments that I interact with now compared to 15, 20 years ago, it's like they're not even recognizable. It's so much different. And I think a lot of that has been driven by wanting to be successful in this league, but also just by the league kind of pushing in various ways to make it happen. And I think it's had a net positive effect on just development generally.
Certainly the league-based structure that has taken over, and maybe it's that sort of peak hysteria right now, has added a different dimension to a club. I mean, because if you look back, and it's still some of the differentiators to, USYS right now, well, historically anyway, has been the sort of hashtag earn your place. Every team competes to move up to a level, sort of the Hoosiers. No matter who you are, where you are, you can end on the pedestal. That was all team-based for so long. The DA was the first real club-based platform. We obviously jumped on that. The DA in 2007. But the importance of club now compared to team is significantly different. And I think that's played a big role in the advancement of the sport. I mean, if you look back, one of the reasons we decided that a club-based league was the right thing to do, I mean, there's a lot of them that, people playing now and coaching now don't even know what the alternative was back in,
right.
Let's just go back, in 2000 and I'll just pick a date, 4. You had to win in your state league at U12 in order to get into the MRL Midwest Regional League qualifier at 13. And then you had to finish in the top whatever at 13 to get into the MRL real at 14. And I might have the age groups wrong a little bit.
I mean, listen, we didn't even have a state league. Like everything we did was based around state cup. And if you had a bad day in the quarterfinals,
you were knocked out early. Yeah.
You weren't in.
Yeah, if you were a state cup finalist, for example, you got into whatever for us, it was regional league, whatever. But what that did is it put a huge amount of pressure to win at 12, 13, 14, because if you didn't, it's not like you had a bad day and you could learn and get better the next day. If you had a bad day, you were stuck in a subpar competition level for another year. And so we looked at that, a couple things. One is, in hindsight, you look at that and you say, man, that is some messed up incentives potentially if you don't have people that are really careful about what they do. And that's not going to be the case with young coaches and young first-time parents in the sport or whatever. The other piece to it on a positive side is if you had a team that did make its way up to whatever level, state cup at the time or the regionals or even nationals, it was a really, really cool experience. But it was like one out of whatever number teams got that experience. And the rest didn't even see anything like that. And so there was a value to a club-based thing to be able to provide that type of experience of what does it feel like to be in a really high-level game, and what does it feel like to have something to chase that's meaningful? What does it feel like to be tested on a regular basis? There was something to be said to offering that to multiple teams in a club and not just the one team that managed to win.
Yeah, I mean, I know, at some point, whether it's today or not, we'll talk about our competition structure. But I remember you and I having this conversation, and this is kind of why. And obviously, the league has evolved in the championships and whatever. But you and I talked about why it was important to have some different levels or include as many teams in the postseason as we could, as it made sense, because we both talked about the experiences that our teams had playing in something like that. And it was just like one team, and you saw the impact in their development and how it affected them. And then how do we mirror that experience for more teams, more people?
It was hard to scale across the club. Yeah.
Right. But that's why we have gotten to the place we've gotten to in our competition. It's how do we give those kids and those players that experience, and how does that help them elevate, get inspired?
And I'm going to jump in before we have somebody sitting here and say, oh yeah, so everybody gets a trophy now and blah, blah, blah. I mean, at the end of the day, in our league, the best play the best. And the best go on. We're just providing similar opportunities to different teams that, to expand that. But the best are still playing the best. And for everybody who says iron sharpens iron, which I hate that phrase, by the way.
Yeah.
But for everybody who says that and believes that happens in the league as well.
But you can do both. both things can be true, right? It doesn't have to be, only, these teams are anointed and allowed to go do this thing. Like, those teams can still do it, and the best will play the best, and ultimately the best will prevail at the end, but you can still do the other thing while you're doing that.
Yeah.
And
it's called a false dichotomy, man. We corrected the false dichotomy.
Right. That's so important. And because there's a finite number of teams and out there that are going to achieve something like that, it doesn't mean we don't aspire to that or dream to that or whatever. But even that team that's on the cusp, you give them that taste of it, and then maybe that does push them on to make it or whatever.
No, that's the old Bobby Bowden. You lose a lot, then you lose a little, then you win a little, then you win a lot, right? That's the pathway of it. Sometimes you need that sort of heartbreaking, man, we almost got there to get there, the next year.
Yeah, agreed. I think in those ways, we will always fall on the idea of, clubs develop players, leagues don't develop players. What's important for us and what remains important, and we always have to do, is just evaluate what we're doing, how we're setting up our competition, what the platform provides players, so that we can allow for those teams, players, clubs to reach what they're capable of reaching. I think there's a balance of what we're doing and providing. And again, the great thing is you and I both have the unique experience, and all the leaders in the league, of running clubs. So I see how it's affected my club and what it's done for our players, even though we lose sometimes, and it's hard. And it can't be discounted that's an important factor, I think, in development.
Another reason for the club-based was the ability to sort of, and again, standards is one of those words that you put that in the wrong person's hand and they just use it as a club, which I think is complete garbage. And there's people.
Christian, we have standards.
I know we do. The ability to sort of set some minimum standards is effective across a club in a way that it never could be in a team-based league. And you remember back in the day, to schedule anything in multiple age groups required, putting together a small tribe, because every team had a different coach and a different manager. And so if you wanted to get even a game across 3 different age groups and bring everybody together, you had to talk to 18 people. We saw this as the league grew. And, certainly every club went through this and still is going through this, depending on when they've joined our league or something similar to it. But when you have to say there's a certain level of professionalism expected, a certain structure or simplicity of communication, a certain efficiency of administration on all the things that are necessary to coordinate schedules and games, that has to happen in this league, it does force a certain professionalization of structure. So it can't just be that, hey, team A trains over here with so-and-so, and if you want to talk to them, talk to this person. Team B trains in a different spot and they're in a different league, and if you want to do some of them, talk to them, because then you had wildly different experiences. And so, Doug Lemoff would call this, in the teaching space, is a school like a mall, where every classroom is just a different brand being done in a different way. Sure. Or is it where there's a philosophy, that is through every classroom? And I think it's the same thing when we talk about a club. Is it what we used to call just a collection of teams in the same jersey? Or is it actually a club that has some sort of methodology, some sort of philosophy, or even if you don't get that detailed, at least some sort of common organization, structure, and communication pathway? To be fair, you still see that in the youth system, where you look at a club and you can say, holy cow, there's nobody in charge of that club.
Well, I mean, I would even push back and say the next iteration, iteration is not the right word, but the next step is, because we've started to talk about that. Everybody used to call it curriculum, right? Which was interesting, but we have a methodology, so I think now that's really, I think, the next step, because again, I know in my club, it's we're trying to get that to that point where you have a cohesive methodology and how we're doing things, which I'm sure a lot of clubs are trying to tackle that as well. So to me, that's the next step for everybody, is you're organized, what you're doing is coherent, your schedule's jive. You're in a competition that provides you what you need. Now you need to have a little more prescribed way you're going to go on this path with these players. It's a big challenge because staffing at the youth level is really, really hard for a lot of reasons.
They don't come to you and say, I want to work nights and weekends, travel all the time.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that's the next kind of step is clubs getting to that point. That's still a work in progress.
The ECNL, always with an eye toward the future, including a new format for Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast, which will feature their president and CEO, Christian Lavers, and their vice president, Doug Bracken. They want your questions. They want to answer your questions on Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast. They will bring on guests as well. We're only getting rolling. When we come back, we'll hear from Christian Lavers about quality control and overcoming constraints. That after these messages from the proud partners of the ECNL.
Soccer.com is proud to partner with the ECNL to support the continued development of soccer in the U.S. at the highest levels. We've been delivering quality soccer equipment and apparel to players, fans, and coaches since 1984. Living and breathing the beautiful game ourselves, our goal at Soccer.com is to inspire you to play better, cheer louder, and have more fun. Visit Soccer.com today to check out our unmatched selection of gear, expert advice, and stories of greatness at every level of the game. From athletes just starting to turn heads to some of the best athletes to ever play their games, Gatorade shows that they are the proven fuel of the best. For the athletes who give everything, nothing beats Gatorade, the studied, tested, and proven fuel of the ECNL.
Welcome back to Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast, where a new format led by President and CEO of the ECNL, Christian Lavers, and their Vice President, Doug Bracken. Before we took a break, we promised Christian Lavers coming back with quality control and overcoming constraints as a kickstart for this informal discussion that I think you'll find enlightening as we continue to bring you more of Christian and Doug every 2 weeks, and I turn it back over to Christian Lavers.
If you want to have some quality control, I mean, I think there's two constraints in soccer. It's fields is number one in terms of having a home, and number two is staffing. You know, and it's one thing to find somebody, and it's another thing to find the right body. You know, and somebody who actually will buy into what you're doing. You know, because again, the way I started coaching, and most of us is like somebody gave you a team, a bag of balls, and a phone tree at the time. Dean, you might remember a phone tree.
And a pat on the behind and say, good luck.
Hey, off you go. Let me know if you need anything, and we'll see you at the end of the year, you know, banquet, you know, and it was all made up. And
you had a banquet?
Well,
hold on, wait a second.
Probably wasn't a banquet. It was probably at the end of the year, like, we'll all go have a beer, you know.
I played for the wrong club. We never had a banquet.
The bank
just about that.
You got thank you cards back in that time too from people.
Gift cards, like the team would give you like a gift card for Starbucks.
And that doesn't happen. And if it does, it's probably some sort of issue you got to deal with.
That's true.
You know, but like now you got to find somebody who says, hey, are you serious about this? And are you actually going to like help these kids not just be successful this year, but connect to next year and, you know, go beyond you? Or is it your little fiefdom? And you know, I don't know. I've found that it's very, you know, the old phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. If people come into a club with this is their way and they've been coaching for 30 years and you have a different philosophy, it's really hard to get people to change and fit in.
Yeah.
You know, they're just going to do it their way come hell or high water.
Totally. That's why I would lean on young people who come in who are eager to learn and try to teach them something rather than like deal with somebody who's, you know, like you said, set in their ways and not going to hear what you have to say. I think it's always interesting just to think back and reflect on, you know, where we came from to where we are and how wildly different it is for the better, for sure. In a lot of ways. I mean, probably in some ways not, but it's crazy to think where, and you were talking about when we were in the team-based system, how just trying to communicate to change anything was a monumental task. I mean, kind of what did it for me was, having multiple teams, coaching multiple teams that were playing in state cup finals and playing at the same time, and people saying, no, we're not going to change your game time. And we were lucky enough one year to have, and I'm sure there are lots of clubs that had this, but we had two teams make the regional final. And I happened to coach both of those teams, and they played at the same time. And the organizers of the event were like, sorry. And you're just like, so I have to tell one of my teams in the biggest game of the season that I can't be with them and I can't coach them. So I think.
Did they win that game without you, by the way?
They did not. We lost both games, actually.
Maybe you should have just been left.
I should have just gone home. And we were in South Dakota, by the way, which, was super, super awesome. But yeah.
By the way, ironically, after the ECNL started, I think Doug and I's team got randomly drawn, quote unquote, to face each other in USYS regionals every year on day one, game one. And it's an amazing factual and mathematical coincidence that happened.
Or, oh, hey, by the way, next year in State Cup, you guys aren't going to be allowed to wear those ECNL patches on your shirt.
Happened as well.
You're like, oh, okay.
Dean, I'm going to bring you in here, man, because you've been listening to all this. You bring a perspective of, you've been around the game a long time and different things. Any of this resonate to you? Are we poking at parts of your brain that haven't lit up in a while?
Yeah, you are, because as you know, I've been around the college game and the pro game for a long time. Started at US Soccer, then MLS, and now doing all of your select games and being around you for the podcast. And everywhere I go, people ask me that have clubs, like the biggest thing is, how do we get in? Like they want in the ECNL, and I don't know that answer specifically. And so I'm telling you, like, I've had that question asked to me by double-digit people. Are you surprised by that?
Come on, 3 digits at least, Dean. Come on. And that is what you call a segue, I believe. That was very well done, Dean.
And that is a very multifaceted question.
We can talk forever on this. When we started in 2009, it was 40 clubs. There were more than 40 clubs in the room, but not all of them wanted to go. Now, between ECNL and ECNL RL, I don't even know the number of clubs. It's probably over 500. If you count boys and girls differently, sure, it's over 500.
No question. Yeah.
So the last thing in anybody's mind ever was like create this sort of the phrase used to be gated community or golden ticket or whatever. That was never the intention. I mean, when we started in 2009, it was, hey, how do we just get better games? Because if you had a good team in 2009, you played in your core part of your season, you played State Cup, where if you were a good team, you probably played 4 or 5 games that you won by 7 or 9 or 10 goals. And then
Christian, you had the really good 90-91 team, right? That won a national championship. Or which team you had the one team that won the national championship?
Yeah, I don't know.
US-wise. So how many good games that year you won the national championship? Means you're the best team in the country. How many good games did you play that year?
It was certainly outside of less than 10, maybe even less than 7 that were actually 1-goal games or 2-goal games.
And how many games total do you think you played? 40, 50?
30, 40, probably 40, and the other piece to that, and listen, everybody who's listening to this podcast has probably had a team that, fits the bill of, hey, this is a really good age group for whatever reason or not. And if the middle of your primary season, you have 3 to 4 weeks of non-competitive games, what we would see is, hey, week 1 is fine. Everybody goes, they train, they're dominant, they come back to training. Week 2, you start to see some, slippage in quality. By week 3, training is dropped off dramatically because they've just won the last 5 games by 7 to 10 goals. They're kids, they're bored, they're arrogant, whatever it may be. And then you get to one game that's, maybe going to be tougher if you're in certain states, and other states it maybe even wasn't then. And if you lose that game, everything's done. And if you win that game, well, good. You're going to get a few more games that are going to be good at some point when you get to regionals. But even in regionals, the old thing was, I hope you draw certain states so that their games are easier. and you stay away from other states until later. You got into that mode, and it just wasn't productive.
Yeah. So we got off topic there. How do I get my club in the ECNL, Christian?
The first part is, I think, I say this a lot as well. We want people to say they want to be in the league because it's the number one league. But more important than that is we want them to be in the league because they're aligned with us in values and what we believe. And so I start with that because we don't want people in the league that are just looking for what's good now. We don't want people who are in the league because where they were just kind of fell apart on them. And they're saying, well, I guess I'll go look at the ECNL now since that's here and the other one isn't. Like, because that's a recipe for just constant change, disaster, and whatever. And like in any profession, any endeavor, you can't achieve things if you're constantly, dealing with shifting grounds. And you have to worry about just being able to stand up and, get things done. You need to have some stability in order to build, grow, and improve. And so we want people that are with us for the long term, which means they're aligned with what we believe in. Number one of which is youth soccer should be led by youth soccer people. That's our probably core value. If we find that, you're aligned with that, and this isn't just, the grass is greener in the ECNL yard today, and tomorrow it's going to be greener in whatever acronym yard, then we don't want that club. We want the club who's here, and they're going to be here because they believe in what we do. And then it's a question of, we are going to look at performance, and we're going to look at performance across multiple age groups. Because as I said earlier, everybody can, not everybody, but a lot of clubs will have one team here, another team there that's pretty good. And then you got age groups that, really, really struggle. And that's one of the hard parts of being in the ECNL, is because it is club-based for all the reasons we went through. So you have to be able to bring 6 age groups of teams that are able and willing to compete at a certain level. And what that means for a lot of clubs, because there's different levels of clubs in the league, you're going to have a couple age groups that may be fighting to be in the top third. You're going to have some age groups that are fighting to be mid-table. And then, a lot of clubs, not every club by any stretch, but a lot of clubs are going to have an age group or two that's going to be fighting just not to be in the bottom 2 or the bottom 3. That requires a different level of commitment and a buy-in and support from not just the club and the coaches, but the parents and the players, because they got to look and say, I got to get better. It's a look across the whole club. And one of the challenges we've had, over the last couple of years is just, where do you get an accurate barometer of who is the best club that's not in the league? Because there are so many different things. People say, hey, it's a fractured youth landscape, right? I hear that all the time, and I want to correct them because it's fractured outside of the ECNL and outside of U.S. club soccer. That's where it's mostly fractured. But within ECNL and within U.S. club soccer more broadly, the landscape is pretty clean and clear. But if we're going to look and say, well, okay, we're going to expand because we feel like that's best for our competition structure, then we have to figure out, well, who does that include? And I tell you what, the way it used to be is we would have these paper applications.
Yeah.
They'd come in. I mean, this was a horrible process to go through, but they would come in. I mean, and people would put in their developmental methodology and their curriculum and all this other stuff that, I mean, listen, I can download Oppenheimer's thesis about how to create an atom bomb. It doesn't mean I actually do it or actually understand it, so there was that piece. But then it was a list of players. And I remember looking at applications from different clubs in the same city that would both claim they developed the same player because, the kids spent, this, 1 year in this club and 8 years in that club or whatever. And then you have a list of games of who beat who. And some of them were formal competitions, some of them informal, some of them, you look at and say, was that, you'd say you didn't actually play that team. You played a team 2 levels down, but you just mislabeled it. It was a nightmare.
You remember when we got all those applications and we were trying to get a foothold in Florida, get down to Florida. We had all these applications and Christian and I were like, I don't know. And he's like, let's just go down there. Let's just go down there. So Christian and I went down to Clearwater when we had all these clubs come and meet with us and talk to us. And that's how we figured out what was what, right? Because
We did that twice. We did that in Portland as well.
Yeah.
And for the record, we're not ever doing that again.
Well, right. Right. I think it's now.
Says, why don't you come in and see our club?
Yeah. With all humility, it's probably now to the point where, right. You don't need to do that. But I think at that point, there was enough of uncertainty of how do we, getting the right people and trying to build it on the right foundation, that maybe just we needed to do that a couple times.
Oh no, listen, don't get me wrong. I think we needed to do that in those two circumstances. I guess my point now is if we were open to doing that now, you, me, or somebody on our staff would be on the road 365 days a year just looking at clubs.
Yeah, right.
The other fact is it's like anyone can put on a dog and pony show.
Yeah, I mean, we were definitely in a different time there. But
man, the point was it was really, really hard. I mean, in the first year, it wasn't that hard, man, because like in 2007, Dallas Texans and San Diego Surf were not in the ECNL. That one didn't take a lot of thinking when they said, okay, we'll join. It was like, duh, okay.
Yeah, Texans came in the second year. Yeah.
And so for a while, some of those decisions were pretty straightforward. Now the onion has been, we've cut the onion so thin. And I think the other piece to this is I don't want to put my hand up, and I don't think you do either, or anybody on our staff, and say, hey, we're the judge of who's good enough or not.
Yeah, not
a chance. Are we pretending that we're going to walk in? And listen, I remember doing that when I was in the DA on the boys side, and people would come and watch one training session in a year, and then they would give a grade on your training sessions. And it was like, this is the biggest farce I've ever seen. So we're not pretending that now. So I'd like to go back. It's like, we're going to look at your performance and we're going to try and figure out what does that mean. And by the way, if you win certain things, it might not mean that much because the level might not be very high. And if you win other things, it might mean more. And if you have players that have gone on and done really good things, it might mean a lot, or it might not mean much at all. So all these things they're so subjective. That's part of the great thing about the game, right? It's so subjective in so many different ways. And you add youth to it and it gets even more complicated. But that's ultimately why one of the reasons why we created the regional leagues, is because we can look at the regional leagues and we know what the level of the regional leagues are compared to what is the level of EA, DPL, GA, NPL, USL, E64, whatever. I'm missing some, right? We know that level because we have clubs in that league. We have clubs with multiple teams in the ECNL, at the ECNL and the RL. And so we can compare within a club, we can compare across clubs, we can compare when they move up into the postseason, and we get a real sense of, okay, how's this club doing in a level that we know, this league in this area of the country is about here, and I'm putting my hands up right now, and this league in this area of the country is a little stronger. That's actually still subjective. Somebody's going to sit there and yell and say it's still subjective, and it is. But it's less subjective than saying, well, I don't know. I don't even know who half the clubs are in this acronym league, much less, who you play, how important was the game that you played at this random tournament.
It's way too hard to make it completely objective. You couldn't, it's impossible to do it that way.
Yeah. And if we make it completely objective, then we're back to some of those very weird incentives of if you win a lot at 12, when, it's easier to win at 12 by doing some long-term negative things developmentally. Well, if we start putting really bright lines, which that's what some people want, well, put in a bright line, tell me. Well, then we're sort of messing up some of these incentives. But make no mistake, performance proves over time. If you're doing a good job, you're gonna win more over time. Performance proves over player development horizons. Clubs that have more and more players that have gone on to college and beyond, and not just like signed. I always make the point, you sign and then you never play, right? You get a sweatshirt to do dorm security when you don't travel. But clubs that
was that you? Are you talking about your college experience?
My college experience did not have a lot of highlights, that's for sure. But for real, if you have kids that go on and do well, that's different than kids that just got, a cup of tea. But that proves over time, everybody can have a one-off, right? Because back to our previous points, the first person that should be credited with player development is the player, right? I mean, you put a fantastic player in a fantastic environment, great things happen. You put a fantastic player in an average environment, they're still probably going to be fantastic. And if you put a fantastic player in a bad environment, let's not talk about, bad environment developmentally, quote unquote. Let's just put that as the name of bad. The fantastic player is still going to be pretty damn good because the player is the player.
No question.
So, at the end of the day, you put all these together, and the answer to how do you get into the ECNL is we look at your club as holistically as possible over the longest time horizon possible with the most objective perspective we can take. And then we say, we think this makes sense or it doesn't. And that's being honest. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't look and say, well, if you won this many titles or you won this many leagues or if you have this many players in these level schools, like all of those are factors in it. And then we also, that narrows it down a lot. And then we also have to look and say, okay, what's the market like in that area? And that's, probably early on it was okay. And I think the Federation did this at the beginning of the DA. It's an interesting thing where they looked at where did all the national team kids come from, all the youth national teams, full national team kids, mapped them out, and then looked at that and said, based if this is where all the players are coming, and we want a presence that is sort of pro rata, for lack of a better term, of like if Atlanta is a hotbed and Southern California is a hotbed, well, then we need X number of programs there, and then there is no player ever in the history of the world that has come out of this area and played for the national team. Well, we probably don't need a club there. Right. I think there was some thought of that, very mathematical way back when. You'd have to talk to somebody else on the details, but that's what I was told anyway. But we did at some point early on look at, okay, well, how many clubs do we think this market can quote unquote support, right, at a high level? I think we've moved away from that to a great degree because at the end of the day, the sport is growing, markets are changing, and, players can come out of a variety of places, given the right, environment.
It would also be super easy for us to move people out, move people in based on the wind in a year or whatever. And I think the other thing it's important to say here is, we understand how hard it is and how, what goes into running a club and playing in a league like this. And we want to support the clubs and give them the opportunity to be successful. That has an impact. We're not just saying, oh, this year you're not good enough. Goodbye.
Well, that's a whole nother topic, right? About moving out. That's a whole nother topic. We can go on this today or another.
But
day.
I think Dean asked how you got in, which you did say, but I just wanted to make that point because it's not so simple as to say.
Nobody will ask that question again because we're on like the 20th minute of the answer. We still haven't answered it. And Dean's looking at me like, when are you going to give me an answer?
There is no easy answer, Christian, really. There is no.
The last piece to that is like we used to be sort of more about how many clubs in a market. And I don't think that's as important to us now. It still plays a little bit in because at some point there is a drop off, but it's proven not to be as small as it was in the minds of the Federation in 2007 and certainly what it was in other people's minds. There's more room for growth. I mean, somebody's going to say, well, look at all the clubs in England, and there's some truth to that. But we do have to look at how many games can you play in the available competition weekends and how far do you travel to play those games? And at some point, you can't build a structure to have everybody, so there is a real cap of, if you're in Wisconsin and, you can't go outside and play soccer from November 15th until April 15th, and then you have high school soccer at a certain period of time, there's only so many competition windows you have. If you're in Southern California, you have more competition windows. If you're in Ohio, you got more than Wisconsin, but you got less than Southern California, right? And so there are some real issues with that. And then the other piece is a lot of our expansion over the last couple of years has been to try, recognizing that players are coming from more and more places because people are doing a good job. And also recognizing that people don't want to spend their whole life in hotels and on 4-hour drives to play soccer. Probably when all of us were young soccer coaches with nothing better to do. We didn't mind that. But at some point, most people say, hey, you know what? I don't need to drive 4 hours and stay in 2 Marriotts to get a good game, that I can get a similar game or maybe a little less quality game by staying at home. And so we've tried to make it so that we're doing what we can not to have the structure itself demand so much cost and travel that it becomes, prohibitive.
We spend, I don't know if you could put a number on the man hours that we spend talking about it, going through it, trying to figure it out. It's a lot. We spend a lot of, we're not dismissive of it. So there a lot goes into it.
And on that note, there are clubs that applied and got in right away. And we can go all the way back to, the early years when it was really easy. There are clubs, if Jason Cutney was on this, he would quite happily say he applied for like 4 years with the Pittsburgh Ribbons before they got in. Dean's shaking his head, right? Because he's heard Jason whine about that. So.
He is still really whiny about that. I don't know why.
Something in the show.
I'm the one that he called for 3 years for what it's worth.
That is true. Yes, that is true. I did not talk to him.
Christian was like, who is this Jason Cutney?
This is true. That's also true. And then there's clubs that are still applying that aren't in, and they are probably understandably, annoyed, frustrated, whatever the word may be. But I can tell you, of all the things that we've said, and hopefully the message is it's a very complicated thing that's not an algorithm. It's just it's more art than science. And anyone who's telling you that in any league, who's not saying that is lying to you. The answer is we take it very seriously. We try and make the best possible decision for the league, the clubs involved, the players. We don't always get it right. There may be decisions we make that other reasonable people would have a different opinion on, and that's life. In general, what we've done is try to provide more opportunity, not less, and nobody has a veto right. There's no blackballing that goes on. And ultimately, I think over time, we've gotten a lot more of it right than we've gotten wrong. But we're operating in a very complex environment that has a lot of different variables, and people can have different weight to different variables in a reasonable way. Dean, you're raising your hand. What you got?
Yeah, whether inside the answer of that question or within the context of what you guys have been talking about this entire thing, is both of you are saying players a lot. And you may think this is over the top, but I actually feel lucky. My first exposure to soccer was with Michelle Akers and Mia Hamm, and then my next camp was with Tab Ramos and Tony Miola. And one of the things that excites me every time I call an ECNL selection game is the players are legit. From 1 to 20, they're legit. And then when I call the U19 championship game, the players are legit. It's working. And I'm a broadcaster. I call what I see, and what I see is really, really good soccer.
You're right. And I'll probably misquote Anson Dorrance on this. Like, I remember it was one of his first books. He said something about politics is what it takes if you're not good enough, and the point is, like, hey, at the end of the day, everyone in the country would agree on who the the top 25 most successful clubs, or maybe let's go top 15. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I'd say 15. Yeah.
Let's go 15. Everybody would say, okay, yeah, these guys are without a doubt. And then after that, you're going to get a broader and broader divergence of opinion, right? And at the end of the day, the level of play speaks for itself. The players are really, really good. And I think that says that we've definitely gotten it right more often than wrong. But the answer is, if people want to be in the league, which we want people always to be in the league, then the answer is just keep working, keep getting better, keep having players that do better.
Agreed.
Isn't it true that Christian did say that he could do the Oppenheimer atomic?
I think he thinks deep down that he could. I don't know.
I did. I watched that movie. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. It's a really, really good movie. I was very, very disturbed at the end of it with how he was treated. It reminded me of Imitation Game, similar disturbing ending. But then I bought the book because I was like, I got to read and see if this actually is all true. And the book is like 700 pages. It's much longer than that. It was pretty accurate, pretty crazy.
Do you see how Christian tried to say he just read a 700-page book and is trying to make us all feel
Well, it's a
than.
long answer about, how we try and make good decisions. Hopefully, because somebody sent this question in, I forget where it went to, but it was actually one of these things that made us say, hey, let's change the format of this a little bit and see how it goes, and try and use this platform to talk to people about things that they really want to know. Somebody said, hey, how do you get into the ECNL? The question was worded differently than that. And obviously we're asked that question 1,000 times.
This is where I plug in and say, if you have a question, send it to info@theecnl.com. As Christian said, we want to answer the questions that you have, and we'll do it as honestly and transparently as we can.
Doug, say that email one more time.
It's info@theecnl.com.
info@theecnl.com.
We had like a couple of topics we thought we might get to today. I think we just got to one. Hopefully it was helpful for people who listen, and I'm sure it will spark some sort of debate or comment. And by the way, for the record, if you disagree, that's fine. We understand that. We don't need to argue about it. We understand there's plenty of people that disagree on what we do or why, but we're trying to do it the right way. It is not a Doug decision or a Christian decision. It is a multitude of people in the decision and a multitude of staff that contribute to the information, and we're going to keep working to get it right. And ultimately, it matters to us to have people that are trying to do the quote unquote right thing in terms of develop good players in a good environment. It matters to us to have a pathway for those clubs to come in to the league. It also matters to us that we want stability long term, and we want people who can count on the league, and not a league that can just turn around and pull the rugs out from underneath them when they're working hard to try and do the right thing.
We want clubs who are similarly aligned with what we want to do and what we're trying to do, so that we have stability. I mean, it goes both ways, stability. It's not one way.
There's lots of places you can play, and we're trying to make ours, the most exciting, highest level we can, just like other people in the space are. So that's actually not a bad thing, that we're pushed to keep moving our bar higher because other people are chasing us, and we work very hard not to be complacent in that, so that we are constantly sort of providing the new experience, the best opportunities. And we talk about that all the time.
Indeed, they do. New format, Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast with ECNL leaders Christian Lavers and Doug Bracken. We have one final segment as Doug poses a question to Christian and even me. That after more messages from the corporate partners of the ECNL.
Nike is a proud sponsor of ECNL Girls. Nothing can stop what we can do together to bring positive change to our communities. You can't stop sport, because #you can't stop our voices. Follow Nike on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
The ECNL is pleased to announce Quick Goal as the official goal provider and partner for ECNL Girls and ECNL Boys, a new partnership created to support the growth and development of the country's top players, clubs, and coaches. At all national events, including national playoffs and national finals, the Quick Goal Coaches Corner will provide hospitality and social space for ECNL Girls, ECNL Boys, and collegiate coaches. Quick Goal will also be the presenting sponsor of the National Championship winning ECNL Girls and ECNL Boys Coaches of the Year and the ECNL Girls and ECNL Boys Goals of the Year. Quick Goal looks forward to helping the ECNL continue to elevate the standards of youth soccer and provide more opportunities to players on and off the field in the coming years.
Christian, I'm going to add a segment to this because I think it'll be fun. Christian, if you were not a president and CEO of a youth soccer club, what would you be? A physicist?
I would not be a physicist. I would probably be still negotiating commercial transactions for legal client.
Okay, cool.
Doesn't that sound fun, Doug? I know Dean is like, man, why didn't he go to law school?
Dean, if I wasn't the vice president and chief of staff of the ECNL, I would want to be a broadcaster.
You told me that once.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but I did not have it like you got it, so it is what
Dean,
it is.
What you got? What's plan B? Or does Dean doesn't have a plan B?
Dean, what's your plan B? If this broadcasting thing doesn't work out, what are you doing?
You know what's funny is I'm going to be a coach, but not for soccer. I'm going to be a basketball coach. That's what I would do for sure. I coached my kids all the way through and got to hang around with Eric Montross and some pretty cool people, and I enjoyed it. I talk to coaches every day. Right before this call, I was talking to Kelly Amonte Hiller, the Northwestern legendary coach for women's lacrosse, who's won 8 national championships, and Hannah Nielsen, who's getting ready to play in her 6th World Cup. And, their passion for coaching and helping young women become great citizens. That's what I'd want to do.
I think it's probably time that we wind this up. We have some topics we think are going to be interesting about the league, about youth soccer, about a bunch of stuff moving forward. Please, we're open to talk. And Dean, I know you're out there talking to a bunch of people. You probably have your own things to throw into this, but this was awesome, guys.
It was awesome. And once again, to send in questions to be featured on Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast with Christian Lavers, Doug Bracken, and selected guests. Once again, that email is info@theecnl.com. For Christian Lavers, Doug Bracken, all of the great people at the ECNL, as well as my producer, Colin Thrash, I'm Dean Linke. We'll see you in 2 weeks with more of the new format of Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast with Christian Lavers and Doug Bracken. Have a great 2 weeks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast. For more information on the ECNL, visit us at www.theecnl.com. And if you have a suggestion for the show or a great idea for a guest, please email us at info@theecnl.com. Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast is an ECNL production. ECNL, more than a league.